Our webinar topic is Effective Prompting with CAS Newton for IP Finder. Perhaps you have viewed one of our previous webinars where my colleagues introduced CAS Newton for IP Finder. If this is your first time learning about Newton, I do encourage you to explore it at your convenience and maybe visit some of our on-demand recordings from previous webinars. Let us begin with an introduction. What is CAS Newton? CAS Newton is Agentic AI, which you may use to support you with your search and analysis in IP Finder, which you may also know as STN. Newton is an AI-powered assistant. It's designed to help you with enhancing your patent search by providing a conversational interface. Now, this can enhance upon the traditional search component. You certainly can continue to use traditional searching, or you may use Newton to supplement your traditional search, helping you with speed and accuracy, but not intended to replace your own expert judgment as a patent professional. What I really like about Newton is that it does provide you transparency around what it is doing. As you will see, Newton is searching STN for you, but you see all of the commands and steps that are taken. It is not acting as a black box which obfuscates the steps. Rather, you are seeing STN in action. And this is designed for IP professionals and using the STN search system, using the same commands and databases. To access Newton for IP Finder, you would log in and you look for this button on the panel on the left. It is this blue and yellow icon that is near the top of the left menu. Please note that there is a setting in your user profile which will dictate whether you want to start your session in the traditional session window with the command line, the IP Finder Query Builder interface, and now we also have an option where you can go directly to Newton as your landing page upon login. There are a lot of different use cases for Newton, and it's entirely your decision how you wish to leverage it. Some use cases, of course, involve telling the AI to do the search for you, but it's important to keep in mind that you can leverage it in other ways. So for example, you can use Newton to learn more about IP Finder or STN. It can be particularly useful for discovery of additional files or databases. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the CAS databases, maybe the Derwent databases, but maybe you are aware that there are some that you've never used or learned about. I encourage you to join our 30-minute coffee lecture on July 16th, where we will have a short session dedicated to database discovery using Newton. Another use case might be assisting you with building a search hedge or a string of synonymous terms for your search. This can be a very useful collaboration tool to help you identify related terminology. You can also use Newton to support you with building your search syntax or strategy. So not only can it be helpful with identifying synonymous terms of interest, but it can also help you with building the actual syntax with using Boolean and proximity operators and truncation operators. And certainly it can be very helpful for learning and using more specialized features within STN. For example, the numeric property searching. This is a very powerful capability within the IP Finder STN interface, but a lot of people don't know how to use this. So Newton can be a fantastic resource to educate you on this interesting capability. We have a webinar that we recently hosted on this topic, hosted by my colleague Jan Bauer. I encourage you to go back and view that recording if you want to learn more about how Newton can support you for numeric property search. So let's move on to today's webinar. Today's webinar is focused on prompting Newton. You might be familiar with large language models and how there are different ways that you can prompt LLMs to support you and execute the task that you desire. When you consider some of the use cases that I just outlined, and then your own level of expertise and your own desires around the control or expectations you have from the AI, this opens the opportunity for you to start to really define how Newton behaves for you. Some lessons that we will talk about today are how you can use Newton to explain its own logic or simply educate you on using IP Finder. You could utilize Newton to support you in a collaborative way, such as analyzing or summarizing the results that you have found. This could be quite helpful for some deeper insights. Or you could perhaps prompt Newton to implement your own preferred style. So maybe you have some very specific expectations around the search process or query building, or even how to sort, analyze, or display results. You certainly can dictate to Newton how it does that for you. And the same with communication preferences. Newton does support non-English language, but it also can adopt whatever tone you provide or whatever sort of output or response you prefer from Newton. So for example, you can tell Newton, always respond to me with some key takeaways or an analysis or some recommended next steps, for example. So let's talk about a few tips. I do have some slides for you to cover these tips, and then I will actually play back some examples that I've previously recorded for you, where you could see some of these tips in action. The first thing I recommend to you is that you consider your own context. Do not assume that Newton is familiar with your intentions or your expectations or experience. Remember, there's a very diverse user base for IP Finder. So it is very helpful for you to recognize your own expectations and consider if your prompting should reflect that. Are you a new user and relatively inexperienced, or maybe you are experienced, but you've thus far had a rather specific workflow and are aware that maybe you have the opportunity to learn some more. Or maybe you are extremely experienced with very high expectations for how a search is performed, and you want to exert a high degree of control over the process. Are you trying to accomplish a specific task? If you're trying to do a prior art search, it's important to note that. If you want it to be extremely comprehensive, it's important to note that. If it's more of a cursory background or landscape type analysis, that's also noteworthy. So again, are you trying to learn? Are you trying to use Newton to supplement your own searching? Or are you interested in fully delegating the job to the agentic AI? How much control do you require? Do you want to give it full control, partial control, or do you want to exert quite a lot of control over how it performs the job for you? These are all things for you to consider before you start prompting the AI to do the job for you. If you simply approach the AI and tell it, search for this topic, there's always an opportunity for you to be disappointed because you then might find that the output does not meet your own expectations. So this is my first tip to you, is to recognize that if you do have specific expectations, it's important for that to be reflected with some very clear directions in your prompt. Let's talk about some of those use cases. I really like Newton as a learning mechanism. Even for me as an experienced STN user, there's always an opportunity to learn more about different databases or different field codes, or simply to get a different perspective. Also, as a trainer, I find Newton to be a very useful mechanism to help educate STN users like you. So when you think about this, there is an opportunity for you to approach Newton and indicate either you are a new user or maybe an experienced user that is just wishing to learn more about a specific topic. It's important to indicate how comfortable are you with STN syntax, how much experience do you have. Now, you certainly don't have to do this, but if you don't do it, there might be kind of an assumption that you're willing to just kind of put the job into the hands of the AI. If you are trying to learn, obviously it helps to clarify to Newton what exactly you are trying to learn. In the example on the right, I'm starting quite broadly with saying I'm a new user and I don't really know anything about STN. Please give me some detailed guidance, and then I give it an example query that I want to use. Certainly, you could approach Newton with something more specific, like, please teach me how to search and evaluate legal status information in Impodoc, or please educate me on how to do numeric property searching. And when you are using it for this use case, it does help for you to clarify what type of responses will support you best. Do you want extremely detailed responses that explain every aspect, not only with commands, but fields and proximity and wildcards? Do you want it to clarify the content within each database? Or maybe you're simply asking for clarification on specific steps to understand why it advised you to do something specific. So when I play back a recording in a little bit, you will see some examples of this. Another use case is certainly the opportunity to do full delegation. This is when you are simply telling the AI to do the job for you and to do the search. Now, there's certainly an opportunity for follow-up prompts and the ability for you to take control later on. But I think this is one use case that people typically start with, where you're just going to Newton and saying, do this search for me. It is extremely important for you to recognize that when you put the job in the hands of the AI, there's certainly a risk of it doing a search that is below your own expectations. So please do not approach Newton with full delegation and then expect it to be completely perfect. That is simply not going to be the case for those of us that are professional patent searchers with rather high expectations for a comprehensive and precise search. But if you are delegating it, then it's good to clarify a few things. What type of search are you trying to do? Is it going to be more of a landscape search, or are you really trying to do prior art? Do you want to include non-patent literature, NPL, or are you taking a patent focus? If you're looking more from an infringement or FTO perspective, certainly it might help to clarify specific jurisdictions. Or maybe you want to do some sort of competitive analysis on a specific organization. If you are delegating a search, it certainly helps to clarify what do you really want at the end of the process. Are you simply looking for one single unified result set, which you can then display and analyze at your convenience? Or are you asking Newton to prepare some sort of output file or analysis or elucidate some key findings for you. So think about that. What comes next? What should be the expectation after you tell it to do a search for you? Now, I imagine a lot of us on this call might actually be very experienced STN users with perhaps some rather lofty expectations and a preference for a high degree of control. I know I certainly fall under that category. If you are that type of user, then maybe you want to exert more control over the AI. So if you do have those high expectations and maybe specific needs, then it does help for you to invest the time into a rather detailed prompt, which includes some pre-search instructions. You will see an example of this when I play back a recording. You don't have to do this, and you certainly don't have to use a specific template. But I think it is worthwhile for you to consider these items so that you can invest perhaps 5 to 10 minutes with defining this strategy. Think of it as rather similar to when you consult with your own client on their expectations for the search. So consider context. What are you trying to accomplish? Consider Newton's role. How do you want it to support you? Should it be a partner, a collaborator, an advisor, or again, are you actually expecting to delegate the job to Newton? Do you have specific expectations for the strategy or the process? So, for example, would you like to define that it goes from one database to another? Do you want it to segregate patent documentation from NPL? Do you have very specific expectations around how it deduplicates results? And then the search style itself. Maybe you have some strong preferences around how proximity operators are used or searching specific field codes. And then also the display. Do you want Newton to always display a multitude of results or perhaps a random sampling? How do you prefer the output to look? And then are there any additional guiding principles? So let's take just a closer look at some of these items. Context. Think about that context. Are you trying to do a specific search type? Do you really want assistance with simply query building so it can kind of advise and supplement your own skill set? Are you trying to learn, as we discussed previously? Or maybe you're okay with doing the search and you simply want Newton to help you understand the results, maybe analyzing them or summarizing them. Again, Newton's role. Define to Newton what it should really be doing for you. Are you going to totally delegate, or do you want it to be more collaborative? Strategy and process. Do you have any specific expectations for precision versus recall? Do you want it to do a fast search, or do you want it to be very slow and exhaustive? Are you setting expectations around required databases or required fields? Do you want it to include certain document types or record types? And consider how it searches. Are we looking at a keyword term approach? Do we want to touch on classifications? Do we want to leverage the unique thesauri that are provided to us? And again, the search style. Do you have requirements around fields, proximity, query building, or even displaying the results? These can all factor in for those of us that have those expectations. And finally, there could be additional rules that you could apply. Do you want it to perform next steps automatically, or should it wait for your own user input? Do you want to advise it on best practices around how it sorts, analyzes, or summarizes the results? And do you have expectations for how it broadens or narrows its own searching? At the moment, it kind of takes a balanced approach where it does some degree of query building and expansion from what it learns, but maybe you want to dictate how it performs that task, such as always using the expand command or always leveraging thesauri. And finally, the communication preferences. Do you want it to communicate with you in a specific way? Not only do I mean language, but maybe you want it to summarize results in a certain way or guide you on next steps. Now, we're about to get to some live demonstration, but I do want to bring to your attention that yes, you can use non-English language. You do not have to interact with Newton in English. If you prompt Newton in a non-English language, such as the example on the right, Newton will respond to you with that same language. Do keep in mind that the searching it's doing on your behalf is still going to be with English. And you can see a little bit of that on the right side of this example, where it still knows that the input commands to STN's messenger interface must be in English, but the interaction with you in the conversation can be non-English. And Newton can provide some rather useful outputs that can differ from the traditional native exporting capabilities that we see within the IP Finder STN interface. So this is certainly useful if you want to perhaps build some other sort of file output, maybe focusing on an analysis that would be typically challenging using the traditional approaches. Okay, so what we are going to do now is move on to a little bit of demonstration. This demonstration is pre-recorded to make sure that the timing is appropriate for a webinar format. And I will play this recording and then I will come back for a little bit more live question and answer. I do encourage you to interact with the Q&A or chat windows as needed throughout. So without further ado, let's move over here to our demonstration. And please do notify us if you have any issues with viewing this or hearing it. Thank you. Okay, so let's start with a little bit of demonstration here. And we're going to use our first example just to show a fairly simple use case for how you can leverage CAS Newton for your own learning and education. So whether you are a new user to IP Finder and you want to learn some more about how to do the commands or how to explore the different databases, or maybe you are an experienced user, but you're aware that maybe there's some new techniques or aspects of IP Finder that you have not yet learned, and you want to leverage Newton to facilitate that learning process. So let's start with an example here where I'm going to type in, I'm a new user and don't have STN experience. Please teach me how to do the search. And in this case, I don't want it to search for me. I want to do it myself. I just want it to guide me. So I'm going to say something like, I want to submit the commands myself. So as you could see here, I haven't even given it any sort of search task. I've simply given it some context and instructions to inform how I want Newton to behave. So it'll give me a response here that should acknowledge that it recognizes the task at hand. Okay, so we get our first response here from Newton, just simply summarizing the task at hand, and it's already helped me out with some initial core workflow, teaching me how to file into a database, expand to browse available terminology, submit the search command, and then display to view my findings. As you can see here, it gives some examples for using these key commands for search, expand, and display. And then even gives me some example workflow that I could try out. Now, in this case, you could see it's prompting for some next steps, and I'll say, okay, let's go ahead and guide through a search. Please guide me through this search. Let's find references. on producing cyclohexane dimethanol by depolymerizing terephthalate. No worries if we have a typo. We know that using a large language model helps us with that aspect as well. Okay, so I've informed it that I want help with guiding through this search. Let's go ahead and find some references on producing cyclohexane dimethanol from the terephthalate polyesters. Okay, so we get our first response here, and it's saying, let's start with our first command, and it's advising that we go to registry. So let's go ahead and type that in using the command line on the right. So in this instance, we're seeing that Newton's not doing the search for us, but we're going to do it ourselves. And as we see here, I've told it, all right, I'm in the database. Let's see what comes next. It's now advising that I expand to learn about the cyclohexane dimethanol substance. Let's submit that. And we've executed the expand command. Okay, and I'm responding to it. As you can see, we could take this kind of guided approach where I am replying back and forth, where it's really holding my hand with this process and teaching me what I can do. So let's go ahead and speed things up just a little bit here for the remainder of the search steps. It's worth noting that you don't have to do this back and forth that I'm doing here. You could simply ask Newton to help you build a strategy or build a search hedge or just advise you with certain questions. It doesn't have to be this step-by-step process that I'm showing you here. So now that I'm at this point, you might notice that we've got multiple terms that might be relevant for polyethylene terephthalate. And as a new user, I might look at this and say, well, what are some of these other substances? So we can always ask Newton for some additional clarification. What are these other E numbers that look related to polyethylene terephthalate? Should I search them too? Okay, so it's actually clarifying for me here that there are a few different, um, perhaps related substances, but it actually recognizes polyethylene terephthalate hydrolase is actually an enzyme which is used for breaking down PET. So this might be a noteworthy discovery that we've made here, may be actually relevant to a biodegradation for depolymerization. This is, of course, super helpful that it's actually bringing this to my attention because I might have otherwise missed this. Now, as we scroll down here, we could see that it's advising me to actually conduct the search using specifically the substance of interest and then think about this next. Do we want to expand from there? So let's go ahead and follow that guidance where I'll say, let's search for E15. And we're going to go ahead and do that display command that it recommended. Okay, I did it and got RN, there we go, 25,038,59,9. Okay, now we've displayed that information and found the RN. You'll notice that Newton's also guiding me to recognize that there are many other names for PET shown within this record, and it's actually advising me why we care about the registry number system. For those of us that are new to STN and new to working with registry, this is an important lesson for us where we now understand why we are working with the registry system and using registry numbers as the key identifier for a given substance. Let's go ahead and proceed with our final search steps for this example. And now we have this recommendation from Newton for how we can start to build our search query. It looks like it's recommending that we use the RN for our cyclohexane dimethanol, as well as some terminology related to depolymerization or recycling. And then it's advising that we use some keyword terms for terephthalate or PET, or maybe even broaden it to polyester. And it's also provided us the registry number for PET for our consideration. So with this, I might go ahead and copy and paste that query, although I might make the decision that I don't want to broaden too far into all polyesters, so I'll just go ahead and narrow down a little bit by removing that search term. And okay, let's go ahead and tell Newton what we found. All right, now it's recommending how we can go ahead and display the answers. This is kind of the last step in our workflow, where if we want to actually view our results, Newton's guiding us through this process. So what we see here is it's actually advising that we display the first 5 answers from L3, focusing on the hit terminology. So let's see what terms hit for us here. Okay, now you might have noticed that it recommended that I display the hit terms, so that's of course helpful. Yes, I see the relevant hit terms. It looks good, but maybe I need to ask a little bit of a clarification. How do I see those titles and additional information? All right, so now I've asked for that clarification. It's advising that I can display some key bibliographic information using specific field codes like the titles, patent assignees, publication years, and other patent information. Now, it's advising me to do the first 15 out of the 49 that we have, and it's explaining how those different display field codes work. Of course, now you can see that it's prompting me to really think about the results that I've retrieved and examine those and provide some feedback as well. So let's go ahead and use one of its recommendations here, where we are displaying this information for the 49 answers. So now that we have some results, we of course could explore these a little bit further, or we could ask Newton for some additional guidance on what to do next. So with this example, perhaps the last thing that we can ask is, okay, these results look good. Can you provide some suggestions on additional databases that are relevant to this topic? So with that, you could see that we have the opportunity to leverage Newton to learn how to use STN. We could use it to help us build our search hedges or to teach us how to use the STN command line. And of course, it can guide you through this process. But do keep in mind that with our initial prompting that we see here, it is, of course, useful to provide the context, the request, and any sort of rules for how we expect it to behave, where we are, in this case, indicating that we want to do the commands ourselves without any sort of intervention from Newton. So let's move on and take a look at a different example. For this next example, let's pretend that you want to fully delegate the search to the Agentic AI, and you're happy to take a more hands-off approach. Of course, it's important to recognize that an AI search is not going to be perfect, and you as an experienced STN user might find that there are better ways to perform the search. But in this example, maybe we're treating it more as kind of a landscape or exploratory search, and then we want some assistance from Newton for analyzing our results and maybe even helping us with the output. So I'll just do some copy and paste here for this example, where we're going to look for a prior art search on enzymatic interesterification catalysts for food-grade fats, and we're going to look at those results before September 12th, 2025. Okay, so we've got our response here from Newton. Again, this example, we fully delegated the search to it, so we're just putting ourselves in the hands of the AI. So let's take a look at what we've got here. It went through a number of search steps, going to CA+, applying a series of search terms, as well as publication year filtering. It's doing some displays so it can analyze the results itself, reading through them, and then it's parsing it out according to patent and non-patent literature. It's taken steps to go to additional databases like the food science database, since we are talking about transesterification of fats, and it's also checking some additional patent database content in IMPEDOC. And finally, gone back to CA Plus for a little bit more of an overview to generate the more scientific response that we see further down. And we've got the summary that it's provided for us here as well. Now, automatically, Newton does some key findings and analysis for you, but at this point, we might want to leverage Newton to help us get some deeper insights into these results. So in this example, I'd like to show you how you can prompt Newton to help get some deeper insights. One example might be this: which organizations have published the most since 2006? All right, we've got our response here from our analysis prompt. Let's take a look at what Newton has done for us here. Now, we do see that it has given us some additional steps where it's following this analysis prompt, looking at publications since 2006, and it does perform a series of analysis steps. What you might observe sometimes is that Newton might actually make a mistake and then actually learn from that mistake. In this instance, it analyzed both the PA and CS fields and then determined that it would be better to actually segregate those from one another. As we scroll through, it's displaying a series of these analyses and then even taking a closer look when it realized that there were a lot of Chinese universities publishing in this area. As we get down into the output here, we can see that this one was a decent output where it's giving us some top industrial organizations and top academic institutions, and even giving us some key findings such as the geographic distribution or a breakdown of organization type and observations of the dominance in China. Now, in this particular instance, this is a case where I'd say this output is maybe not exactly what I wanted. So if we go back and look at the prompts that I submitted to it, I could have been a bit more specific. Maybe I should have asked it to analyze a specific field, like for patent assignees or corporate source, or maybe I can specify to it, just give me one single discrete list where it is rolling up different institutions into their parent organization. So this is an instance where we'll see that a somewhat vague prompt can occasionally lead to a response that isn't exactly what you intended. Now, in this next example, let's ask for some additional insights. And I'll say, give me the top 50 most relevant patents and journals from the previous result. I need them tabulated with the publication number or DOI, the organization name, and the title. So let's maybe learn from our previous mistake and clarify what we mean by previous result. Do I want it to do this analysis with one of these more recent result sets, or did I mean for this to be an analysis of one of our earlier L numbers? So as we look at the searches that were done here, maybe I should be a little bit more specific. And in this case, I might say that I want to analyze perhaps L4, which is the output from our CA plus searching that we saw here. Okay, let's submit that. Okay, let's see our response from that third prompt. Scrolling back up a little bit here, we see that it went back into CA plus to look at L4. Now, certainly to perform this task, it could simply display and read the records very quickly, or it could do an analysis command. And then what we see is that Newton is, of course, enabled to tabulate the information as I requested. So this is good for you to know as well when you do your prompting, is that you can become very specific with what sort of output or information you want to see. And in this case, we requested it to be tabulated. Scrolling down a little bit here, we of course get some additional statistics on that summary, and then the option for some additional analysis or outputs. But with maybe our last prompt in this example, let's go ahead and tell Newton that we want a CSV file so that we can take this output into a different format and work with it offline. And we get our output here from Newton. As you can see, we get our pipe delimited CSV. If you're unfamiliar, the pipe is the straight line symbol. And we've got our number of the record. We've got the document type, the DOI or patent number, the organization name, and the title. And so with this information, we could copy this output if we desire, and then paste this into something like Microsoft Excel, where we can work with it from here. Of course, with the search that's been done here, you can, of course, capture this information using the export capabilities found within your transcripts menu. This information is being displayed in your session menu, so you might also want to consider some of the native exporting capabilities that are found within the STN interface. But you might find that it's quite useful to prompt Newton to analyze things that might not otherwise be found in a traditional STN display field. With that, let's move on to our third and final example today. In this final example, I'm going to show you how you can provide some extremely detailed pre-search instructions for those of us that really want to exercise a high degree of control over how Newton supports us. So in this example, you're going to see quite a lot of information here that I'm putting in to define exactly what I want Newton to do for me. Now, you don't have to follow this exact format, but this is a general template that you might consider, as we've discussed previously. First, I'm giving it context to say I'm going to do all the searching, and I want Newton to help me with the analysis and also building my search hedges. I'm clarifying Newton's role, saying that it should be doing purely analysis and helping me build queries, as I am an experienced STN user. Finally, I'm giving it a series of rules. I'm telling it don't do any search commands unless I tell it to. I'm telling it that it should only do the necessary display and expand and analyze commands as needed, and that it should always clarify expectations if it's uncertain. Scrolling down a little bit further, we can add additional mandatory constraints, such as it should always wait for a user directive, or when it is analyzing and displaying information, it should display a certain amount of records, and it should never base conclusions upon samples that are too small. Also, it's quite good to indicate that we can display a random selection of results. Finally, you also can really control what display fields or display formats are used in different databases. So certainly this is quite a lot of information to clarify. And as you can see on my screen, it's a very robust pre-search instructions that we've input here. Again, you don't need to do all of this. You could do just a portion of it. And this particular example that we see on my screen is just one use case where I'm telling it, I'm going to do the search, and I want Newton to help me build my queries and do the analysis. Certainly, you might have some other instructions for an entirely different use case, such as maybe telling it how to search, how to sort, or how to display. When we look at the response here, it's not doing any search for us yet. It's just clarifying that it does recognize the task at hand, and then that it's going to wait for me to do some searching. So I'm now going to conduct some manual searching using traditional techniques, and we'll skip through that quite quickly, and then we'll get to some further prompting for where Newton can help me. All right, so what you saw me do here is just using the command line on the right to perform some initial expand and search steps where I'm using controlled terminology within the CA+ lexicon to explore terminology for meat substitutes or vegan meat substitutes. Now that I'm in this space, I might say, okay, I've got a few thousand results here, but I'm pretty sure that my search strategy was not comprehensive. I would like to learn more about related terminology and classification codes that could be useful for continuing to build my search strategy. Let's go ahead and prompt Newton to help me with some additional analysis. I want it to analyze L4 to identify additional terminology that is related to vegan meat substitutes, and I want it to find any controlled terminology from the lexicon that I missed from my search. All right, so we've asked Newton to perform some additional analysis and help provide some recommended terminology to supplement my search. It did do a very lengthy series of select and displays. Certainly, Newton sometimes does this using analyze commands or simply displaying records to then read through them and identify related terminology. In this instance, it performed a series of select commands on the previous records to evaluate that control terminology. And it comes with some outputs here telling us that there are some recognized controlled terms from our previous results that are noteworthy, and I might want to build a search hedge using some of these terms. It's starting to recognize some related substitute terms, as well as some related or analogous terminology. So if I were particularly interested in cultivated meat in the laboratory, I might want to use some of these controlled terminology that we see here. Scrolling down a bit, we see that it's also found that are specific, but maybe or maybe not as relevant. Certainly, if we wanted to use things like lentil proteins or rice proteins, there might be a chance that we want to add some additional context to ensure that it is within the general thrust of vegan-based meats. And scrolling down a little bit further, we do see that eventually Newton does give us some recommended search terms that we can use, and of course, some options for including the protein source or cell-based meat. So from here, of course, I could type in my own manual strategy using these recommendations, or I might ask it to simply build the search query for me. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, so Newton has performed the task of actually building the query through doing some of these search steps. Certainly, if I did not want it to actually perform the searching here, I probably could have clarified that a little bit further, but I found this to be a very effective way of building the search hedge for us. Now, upon further review, I do see one term here that I think I probably could have omitted. Single cell proteins does not really meet my expectations for this. However, I was very pleased to see that when it did search for animal tissue cultures, it did combine that with the necessary context of meat or food. So from here, we certainly could utilize the output that it's provided here, or I could go ahead and edit the search queries that it's provided to me and make some additional refinements with my own level of control. So let me go ahead and do that, and then we'll move on to our classification analysis. Okay, so now let's just pretend we are happy to continue with L13, and I want to get some assistance with exploring relevant patent classification codes. So let's go ahead and tell Newton to analyze the patent classifications for us and recommend some related IPC codes that could be of greatest relevance. So let's tell Newton, analyze the IPC codes for L13 at the subclass level. Okay, Newton's performed the analysis for us here. Let's scroll up a little bit and see what it did. So we see that it performed the analysis command on the international patent classifications. The IC field code works for that. And it's displaying those top international patent applications for us. Now, what it is able to do is, even though it's displaying the entire code, it's of course able to read through this and then shorten it to the necessary length for the subclass level that I requested. Now, it provides for us here those top subclasses, A23J for protein compositions and foodstuffs, A23L for other foodstuffs, including meat substitute formulations, and then some others that are perhaps related and present, but not necessarily of the highest relevance to meat substitutes. Also, a nice thing that we do see in this response is a noteworthy finding here, in that it's saying, FYI, only 11% of these records are actually patent records. So it's worth noting that if we do an IPC filter, we would be actually excluding a vast amount of non-patent literature. Now, for me, I'm just using this to help broaden my search strategy. I won't be using it as a filtering step. So finally, Newton does give us some rather useful recommendations on the codes that we could consider, and we could take all of this information along with the controlled terminology that we learned previously to be rather intentional with building our own search strategy. Going back to our pre-search instructions at the top of this example, it is again noteworthy that you don't need to use all of these clarifications, but if you are someone that wants to leverage AI search while still maintaining a high degree of control, it is going to be worthwhile for you to put in the investment for this level of specification early on so that you can ensure that Newton meets your own expectations.